Shabbat Shalom. During the Purim of 2021, Jacob Spike Krause and Temple Israel of Michigan released a viral music parody. And that video was called simply the Purim Song, or alternatively, the End of the Book. And it has a cast composed almost entirely of Muppets. The song starts, there's a sweet little human teacher, her Muppet charges, they're all in Zoom boxes because it's 2021, and they spend 5 minutes delving into the music of Purim, but not the parts that we are usually spending so much time on. The valor of Esther, the wisdom of Mordecai, the evil of, and you can boo every single time I say it, I will stop, Haman. Get that practice in for tonight and tomorrow. No! They spend their energy singing about chapter 9 of Megillat Esther, which they innocently, sweetly describe as the massacre hidden at the end of the book. And what do you know? They are right. If you go and open the book of Esther and turn to chapter 9, you will read some of the following verses. And so, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is Adar, the Jews mustered in their cities to attack those who sought their hurt, and none could withstand them. And the Jews struck at their enemies by sword, slaying and destroying, wreaking their will upon their enemies. In the fortress city of Shushan, the Jews killed 500, and the rest of the Jews, those in the king's provinces, likewise mustered. They fought for their very lives. They disposed of their enemies. They killed 75,000 of their foes. And meanwhile, our little Muppet children are singing, "Please don't talk about the bloodshed hidden at the end of the book." But I can't help myself. We really must talk about what happens at the end of the book, at the end of the Megillah. Before we get to the end of the book, though, we really need to understand what brings us to such a bloody result. We return to chapter 3, shortly after Mordecai and Haman I love it, have their first encounter. Haman has, of course, been insulted by Mordecai's refusal to bow down to him. He plans his vengeance, and now we're in deeply familiar territory. We need to read very, very closely. It is the month of Nisan, the first month, when he decides to throw his pour, his lots, and randomly determine the day that he will lead a pogrom against the Jews, a mass killing of the Jews. And when he rolls the dice, they come up in the month of Adar. In fact, they come up on the 13th of Adar, which is today, this very moment. And the Megillah says, accordingly, written instructions were dispatched by courier to all the king's provinces to destroy, to massacre, to exterminate the Jews, the young, the old, the children, the women, on that single day, on that 13th day of that 12th month, which is the month of Adar. And it can be a challenge for those of us who do not live our everyday lives by the Jewish calendar to orient ourselves when we read details in a text. I know this, but this point is absolutely vital. Nisan, when Haman rolls his dice, is the first of 12 months. And Adar, the result he gets is the final of 12, final of 12 months. And in the world of random probability then, our villain has just rolled the longest possible distance between the time that he is sitting in and the time that he will act in, which means that the extermination of the Jewish people is publicly scheduled for nearly 1 year from the day that it is announced. And so the Persians have a choice. They have 1 year to opt in to being a part of this pogrom. They have 1 year to determine if they want to kill their neighbors and enrich themselves through violence. And then Haman dies within 1 week. Haman announces his decree. That's day 1. Mordecai goes to see Esther, and she fasts for 3 days. That's 4. She goes to see the king. That's 5. She hosts 2 feasts, 6 and 7. And at the end of that second feast, Esther confronts him, and he is impaled on the very stake that he was meant for Mordecai that very night. 1 week. Which means that now the people of Shushan, who, as we all know, were forced to bow down and scrape before him, have seen what have happened to him. And they have 1 year minus 1 week to determine, do they still want to go through with his plot? Do I still want to arm myself and murder my neighbor and his entire family? And then, 2 months later, on the 23rd day of Sivan, which is the 3rd month, Mordecai and Esther, who now have the explicit blessing of the king, send out a new decree. And this decree, as the Megillah tells us, it cannot undo the first one. The king has made it legal to murder Jews of any and all age on the 13th of Adar. The only thing that the king can do now is to make another law. And so the new law comes out, and it is announced throughout the entire kingdom, and it says, quote, "The king permitted the Jews of every city to assemble and fight for their lives. If any people or province were to attack them, they were entitled to destroy and massacre and exterminate its armed forces together with their women and their children and plunder their possessions on that same single day, which is the 13th day of the 12th month, which is Adar." And so now we are roughly 8.5 months from the scheduled date of our pogrom. And the entire Persian population has a choice. Do they still want to go and muster to kill the Jews of their nation? The king has clearly changed his mind. And while yes, technically it is still legal to go kill Jews on the 13th of Adar, in doing so you immediately risk your own life. More than that, you risk the life of your wife, your child, your entire family. You lose every right to property that you have. Is this still a good idea? And at this point, the vast majority of rational people, even self-interested people, would sit down and simply take the easy, safe action and say, you know what? It's 8.5 months from now. I'm just going to live. I'm just going to choose to live my life as normal. I'm just going to choose not to go out and try to kill anyone on this one specific day 8.5 months from now. That is the rational choice. That is the easy choice. That is the safe choice. So let us then imagine for a moment the kind of person who decides to take the better part of a year, 8.5 months, eyeing up their neighbors, weighing their options, knowing the penalty, understanding what's going to happen to their family, has no doubt heard what happened to the king's advisor on his gallows, and still decides on the 13th of Adar to launch an all-out attack of extermination against the Jewish people. According to the Megillah, 75,800 people make that second choice. And we have had 2,000 years to have deeply mixed emotions about it. Because after all, that is the quote-unquote massacre at the end of the book. And sometimes our discomfort manifests as a Muppet-filled music video. And sometimes it's a rabbinic commentary or sermon. Sometimes it's a student coming into my office with questions. Sometimes it's choosing not to engage or read the hard parts of the Tanakh. Sometimes it's a teenager who is filled with a terrible sense of disillusionment, because any loss of life, any violence which involves the Jewish people, it triggers something uncomfortable inside of them, and they ask, is this who we are? Is this who and what we are? Is this Judaism, this joy of Purim, just a cover-up so that we can have a bloody purge? Are we actually the bad guys in the story? And I heard it. The answer is no. The Megillah does not default to the Jews spontaneously attacking their suspected enemies. It does not glorify or promote being drunk on a reversal of power. It does not ask us to indulge in bloodlust. It does not encourage violence as a first and best course of action. It is the last resort. But that no, all of those steps that it takes to get there are not immediately apparent if you're just doing a breezy reading or reading a small summary of the Megillah. It's easy to lose that point, and that's why it's so important to read. It's why it's so important to study the text with care and to see that the end of the point is an instructive story. It is Shabbat Zachor, and the Megillah, the 9th chapter, warns us that there will be times when no amount of common sense and no amount of self-preservation or humane standard or love of family or cultural clout will deter people who want to harm us. And when those moments come, and they will come, says the Megillah, we will need to meet that violence with our own strength, because it will be the only self-defense we have against a premeditated act of genocide. It is not a large leap to our modern day. But it is not where I want to go this morning. I want to tell you why, really, honestly, truly, why it is so important to read the end of the book, to read all of the ends of the book, to read the parts of the Jewish story, our history, our text, our heritage that are hard, that make us uncomfortable, the parts that are not sanitized, the parts that are not simplified. We read the end of the book to educate ourselves, our children, our people on the terrible weight and the awful cost that we have to pay to ensure our own survival. When Jews only have an experience of Judaism that puts things into a binary of victimhood and victory, of clean, bright, simple, they tried to kill us, they failed, let's eat, we're still here, and none of the messy details are ever learned or experienced, it builds up a fragile and vulnerable Jewish identity. An identity that crumbles the minute it encounters the very real, very messy, very complex world outside our window. Because when there are people who have decided they want to kill you, and you commit to fighting back, the story does not end with clean hands. And the Megillah, beneath all of its frippery, and all of its fun, and all of its farce, is desperately trying to teach us that. So let me return to the viral video hit. Look it up after Shabbat. The Purim song, the end of the book. Because don't get me wrong, I like it. I like the song. I like the music video. I even like the irritating little Muppets. But this Purim, I beg you, please, read the end of the book. Shabbat Shalom.